Wondering what you have to file as a limited company? Well, watch on. As a business accountant, my team and I spend all day long helping business owners on their journey. And of course, helping owners make sure they've filed everything they need for their limited company is a key part of that. In this video, I'm going to run you through exactly what you need to file as a limited company owner and who you need to file it with. I'm also going to give you some thoughts on how you might file it. So in terms of what you need to file, there are two places you need to send stuff to. The first one is HM Revenue and Customs, the tax office. And the second one is Companies House, the registrar of companies, and it's the public record. So as the name suggests, one of these is a private submission and the other is a very public one that anybody can see. To start with HMRC then, you need to file annual accounts and a tax return. And this is different to say a sole trader or a self-employed person where it's just a tax return. And in those cases, there's no need to submit formal accounts in those situations. Now the accounts themselves in this case is a relatively hefty document made up of a few different pages and reports. So you might have heard of some of them. So terms like profit and loss account, balance sheet, and then there's going to be some notes and some other things as part of those. And how many pages and how detailed they are depends on your business and what choices you make around the accounting standards as they're known, because you can choose from 2 or 3 different types of accounts. Now, if you're listening to this thinking, oh my God, this sounds complex, don't worry. This is usually why it's super rare for an owner to do this part on their own. It's usually kind of the starting point of most accountant services that they provide for this reason. So don't worry about the technical aspects too much. I just want you to get a better feel for the documents and what they are at this point. So these accounts have to be prepared each year in line with the accounting standards, and then they have to be electronically tagged as it's known and attached to an electronic corporation tax return. There's no paper versions of this, it's all electronic these days. Now, the corporation tax return is just the company's tax return. In the same way as a sole trader, you might have had a tax return, a limited company also has it, but you just have these accounts in combo with it. So each year then you have this dual submission of the accounts and the tax return to do. And the deadline of this depends on your company's year end. So it's not like the personal tax year that runs from, say, the 5th of April each year to the 6th of April. It's based on your company year end. Now, that year end is normally based depending on when you started the company, but it can be changed. So if we presume, for example, you started trading, though, on the 1st of April, just to keep it easy, in this case, you trade all year until the 31st of March and you draw a line, and that's your company year end. Now, the deadline for those accounts to be submitted would normally be 9 months after that year end. So in this case, where your year end was the 31st of March, your accounts would be due by the 31st of December. Now, the corporation tax return itself actually has a little longer. It's got a 12-month deadline, weirdly, so it'd actually be due in the following March. However, just to add to the complexity, you're actually due to pay the company tax bill 9 months and 1 day from the year end. So in this example, your tax would actually be due on the 1st of January. So weirdly, as you can see there, your accounts and your tax bill actually needs to be paid and submitted around the same sort of time, even though you've got a little bit longer for the corporation tax return, which is really weird. So, and there is a technical reason for that difference, but I'm not going to dive into that here. Just know that it's highly unlikely that you would ever prepare a tax return and a set of accounts at different times because it's super odd. But in practical terms, you have to do the following. You have to prepare the accounts themselves to work out what the taxable profit is. That taxable profit then goes into a corporation tax return, so you can figure out what the tax bill is. Once you know that, you then have to kind of look that back into the actual accounts themselves to finish those. So yeah, it's very unlikely that you would not prepare them both at the same time for that reason. And this, as you can imagine, is often where the difficulty comes in because you need the knowledge and the software, as we touched on, to do the submission. But I'll talk about your options for that a little bit later in the video. It's worth mentioning as well that something that catches people out in the first year. So if this is you and this is the first year, you often have a slightly shorter than expected filing deadline due to the way the rules work. And you might also have 2 corporation tax returns to do. One could be for like a year period, one might be for a few days. This is more detailed than we've got time for in this video right now, but just know in the first year, you might have slightly less time to submit these accounts and slightly more things to do in terms of that second corporation tax return. Now, finally on HMRC, when it comes to submission, it's worth noting, as I said, this is the private information between the two of you. No one else is seeing this one. So it's full detail. It's all the expenses, all the revenue, all the profits, everything for them to see, which is absolutely different to the second place that we're going to talk about, and that is Companies House. Now, the Companies House submission goes on that public record we spoke about earlier. You can simply go to Google right now and you can type Companies House Beta, B-E-T-A, and you'll be able to search for any company you can think of, and you can see their filed accounts amongst other information. Now, that other information is quite good because we mentioned earlier about filing deadlines. And if you want to check your own filing deadline, particularly relevant in the first year, just go on there, type your own actual limited company name, and you'll be able to see there, and it'll tell you exactly what that date that you need is. And then you're going to know exactly when both your company year end is and also the date that you need to submit it. Now, because it is public record, as we said, for this reason, you're normally going to want to submit a second different version of the accounts, like a completely different format that hides certain details you wouldn't want the public to see. So, for example, it's unlikely you'd want the world to see how much revenue or sales you're doing, how much profit you're making, that kind of stuff, where you spent your money. Now, this is going to come as a bit of a shock, I'm sure, but at the time of recording this video in 2025, this option is scheduled to actually be removed, and you would actually have to submit turnover and profits to Companies House to see, but that is another video I've touched on before, and I'm sure we'll do many more before it actually comes live. But even in that case, presuming it comes into play, you're still likely to be able to submit a slightly cut down set of accounts. You're still going to do two versions. So you do that one set to HMRC that's got all the full detail on, and then you do another set that's going to keep as much data as you could private. Now, currently, those options are known as abridged or filleted accounts, and they're likely to be going away, as is another set that's currently doable called micro entity accounts that have very little on them. Now, personally, I'm not a fan of micro entities even in 2025 for growing businesses, and that's because you can have issues with credit scoring agencies or people you might want to borrow money from, because there's so little data on there. It's very hard even to tell the kind of health of the business or even remotely what's going on. But the filleted versions that we mentioned, I think, give slightly more detail. You've got bigger notes and a bit more depth, but you don't have to disclose any of the super sensitive stuff like turnover or profits that you probably will have to do in the new one. But even in the new sets, at the time of recording this video, it's still an unknown, but we're currently being shown that it's unlikely to be too detailed. It's just going to be like turnover, costs, profit. So you're still going to want to do a separate set from the revenue ones. They'll be a lot more detailed. Now, as a side note, you could, of course, just submit the same set that you gave to the revenue, but you're letting the world see some pretty sensitive commercial data on your company. So it'd be highly unusual to do it, even though every year there's a couple of people that come to work with us. They have done that. Either they've done it themselves, not knowing they didn't have to, or another accountant's done it and they weren't sure and didn't know what was actually being submitted. So there you go. Now, it's probably worth touching on what happens if you don't submit your accounts on time then, because it will be no surprise to start with to learn that there are pretty hefty penalties from both Companies House and from HMRC. They come from two sides, and often it's quite easy to get caught out and get penalties from one and not the other. So maybe you've done the accounts, but you forgot about your corporation tax return. And in many cases, the Companies House bit is the worst bit, and they can actually go far as taking you to court, as we'll touch on. And you might think, well, how actually often is that? Well, I can tell you, over the years, over the 18 odd years of doing this, we've had several prospects come to us where they're going to be taken to court unless they sort it out. So it's absolutely common to make sure you're on top of these things. Now, the Companies House fines, they can be 150 quid upwards, and they get to £1,500 very, very quickly. But the thing about them is, if you're late in year one and you're late again the next year, the penalties double. So it's absolutely key to make sure you get these accounts submitted on time. And when they are quite a detailed thing to produce, you don't want to leave those to the last minute. Now, there's another consequence that's even worse than all this of non-submission, and I'll tell you a story about that later on in the video. But for now, we've talked about the fact that accountants are usually the go-to here. But you might be thinking, well, is there not just some free, easy bit of software I could give it a go and just see if I could do it myself? And in previous years and in previous iterations of video, there was a dual filing tool you could use. This option is either gone or it's been discontinued. So you're going to need commercial software for this, which is surprisingly not cheap. For this reason, you normally end up back with an accountant. So for example, we've actually got some clients who in themselves are accountants, so they know how to do these things, but they still engage us to prepare and file those accounts because it's just not worth the money to pay for the commercial software just to file one set a year. Now, accounts and corporation tax returns out the way, there's also a third set of returns that needs doing at Companies House each year, and they're the slightly easier ones, and that's your People with Significant Control Register, sometimes referred to as a PSC register, and your confirmation statement. And these are kind of like data update returns. So they're key returns that you're required to every year to confirm effectively like who owns the company. Has there been any changes in shareholderships? Who are the important people? And these are usually submitted around your company's birthday. Again, if you wanted to be sure of the due date, you can actually type your own company back into that Companies House beta search site, and it'll give you the date of when they're due. Now, again, as we record this video, we mentioned there's a lot of changes going on in this space. Currently, there is still a free tool to do this submission each year. And even actually under the new legislation changes that are coming, they're saying they're going to be keeping this tool. So hopefully you'll still be able to do it. However, I think you might find that the way you do it's going to change slightly. The process is getting a lot tighter. So you're likely going to be asked to be able to prove your identity and things like that. As I'm recording it, this is being developed. It's not in at the moment, but that's the process they're telling us is going to be the case. So if you're watching this maybe a bit later, it might be that you've already been asked to do that, or or you're coming around and you're doing your confirmation statement and suddenly you're being asked to prove your ID. That's absolutely part of the new process and probably a subject for another video. And as a side note, there is a fee to pay to Companies House each year for this return, so watch out for that as well. And as I said, in terms of difficulty, these ones are actually slightly more easier than some of the others, but again, some of the wording might be a bit confusing, but you'll likely find if you're already using an accountant to do your corporation tax and your accounts, they're likely to sort this out for you. I know in our situation, we actually prefer to do these than not. It's just something that we want to make sure happens because they're so important, but do check with your accountant. They all work differently. So I did mention earlier that there was another consequence of not filing your accounts, and that's if you don't file the accounts or these 2 annual returns, eventually Companies House will look to what's known as strike you off. They're going to dissolve your company, which means it's no longer going to legally exist. And that is a pretty horrendous thing when it happens. And that is not only because you can't trade, because you don't legally exist anymore, all of your money in your bank accounts gets frozen and is given to the Crown. So it is absolutely, as you can tell, best not to let this happen. So to ensure that you get all the reminders you need to make sure that Companies House can write to you, just check your registered office. Again, you can go to that Companies House beta and just check that address is right. But also make sure that it's accessible. I know a lot of people buy online places, and just make sure you're getting your post because they will write to you and remind you there's key codes you need and things like that. So you need access to that registered office address. Now, if it has happened and you do get struck off, so what's known as being dissolved, as we said, often you can actually get it back. But the problem is it's a court process. And as you can imagine with anything with a court process, is neither quick nor cheap. I've done it a few times with new clients that have come to us. It's a horrible situation because they've got this company, they built, they're doing well, and then for whatever reason, they just weren't up to date with their filing, or they thought they were, and then this happens, and they're basically in limbo until the court process gets sorted out, because you have to submit all the stuff first that's overdue, and then apply to get it restored to the register, and it can be just a massive headache. So really make sure you're across it and make sure those accounts and those returns get done every year. Now, talking of returns, the corporation tax return particularly, in this next video, I'll run you through even more detail about corporation tax in general, and of course, how you reduce that tax bill. So check it out.